This patient has a very dense posterior subcapsular cataract, so the red reflex will be somewhat compromised by that, as you see. So we'll wind up staining the anterior capsule with trypan. So we've made the side port and now the 2.4 millimeter entry. So the syringe is set up to have air, then trypan. So the injection with air will clear a lot of the aqueous out of the anterior chamber, and particularly over the surface of the lens. And then the trypan won't be dilute as it spreads out over the lens. And it stains it within seconds. You really don't have to wait more than almost the time it takes to get the lidocaine that I'm going to now inject. A little stinging for a few seconds. And then finally we'll put the viscoat distal to the bubble. And that will expel the bubble. Expand the pupil. Wet the cornea, please. Now, of course, when you expand the pupil, the area of trypan won't extend out to beneath where the pupil used to be. But that's okay, because you don't have to go out there when you do the capsulorhexis. So you want to be able to manipulate the position of the globe to get the light reflexes of the microscope so that they don't interfere with your visibility as you grab the capsule and then begin the tear and follow it around. So I'm kind of following the outline of the pupil here more or less as I go around and create a capsulorhexis that's somewhere in the low 4s, somewhere 4.2 to 4.5 maybe. Now comes hydrodissection on each side. And you see, notice how I push the nucleus back down after each injection of the BSS around the lens. Okay, that's 180 degree of visco dissection done with viscoat. I think that's a really good idea to incorporate into your routine, regardless of whether you do divide and conquer or phaco chop, vertical or horizontal. Okay, so now let's test infusion capacity. It's quite good. But look at this sleeve. Okay, look how much needle is exposed. You might like that amount, but I don't. It's more than I want. So I'm lowering the sleeve and test infusion again. It's still fine. So we're now ready to insert. So a little message there is, you know, you don't just take the instruments, phaco tip, whatever settings as they're given to you. You set them up the way you best like them for the procedure and technique that you're doing. Alright, so this is probably a fairly dense nuclear cataract. I've got the chopper out over the equator, holding it nice and still. Zooming and focusing now as I get deeper. Keeping the three red reflexes out of the three microscope reflexes out of my field as I do it. So now I'm deep. I got a red reflex coming. I'll be able to chop there. Bimanual nuclear rotation and just non-impaled chopping. Okay, so we only need one more chop of this heminucleus here, quadrant removal. Just removing some loose cortex and stuff to improve my visibility as I do the last chop. Okay, so now we're into quadrant removal, and all we have to do is lift the fragment up and take it away. Wet the cornea again. seeing a case that's stained with trypan is gives you the opportunity to see, where is the lens capsule? How close do I ever get to it with a phaco tip? And the answer is sometimes pretty close, especially if you're doing divide and conquer and you're going out into the periphery to sculpt. I mean, you're right underneath it. So one of the advantages of CHOP is you tend to stay more in the center of the chamber as you do the procedure. Now that's a pretty big fragment. I just kind of stripped off some of it. With the chopper. Notice where the chopper is now. That's very important. There's no way, if I got a big infusion misdirection syndrome, that posterior capsule could have come up to the phaco tip. And those of you watching in 3D could really appreciate how much far posterior, really, I had the chopper to the phaco tip during that last quadrant removal. So it looks like most of the PSC is rubbed off, or washed off, I should say, the posterior capsule, but we'll see how much is still there. And if there's not some PC fibrosis, it would be a little surprising. With that much of a PSC, you'd expect some conversion of cells to fibrotic tissue. Subincisional. And to really get a good view of that, I'm going to rotate the eye toward me. And then just kind of scoop it out there. And now we'll go after subcapsular epithelium. Now you can set your vacuum if you want when you do that at around 100, so you never go over that. And sometimes I might even get up to 150 or so when I do it, but I don't set a specific vacuum level. I can hear the tones. So there's our PC fibrosis. So there may be some epithelial cells here, but whatever. I mean, the fibrosis is going to be permitted to remain, and that's a YAG at a later date because it's so simple to do that. Now as I deepen the posterior chamber here, I'm rubbing the posterior capsule. Because if I get just a little clear area there in the middle, the vision will be quite good. But fibrosis, that's not coming off. Epithelial cells will. Wet the cornea, please. And I'm rubbing this capsule only as I inject. When I get to the end of the OVD, I'll either get more OVD or stop. Anyway, that's about as much as I can get off. So now IOL insertion. And I'm just pushing the cartridge tip downward and nasal. And that keeps it seated. Because the incision's 2.4, and typically the cartridge tip won't get all the way into the eye with a 2.4. Neither does it have to. OVD removal first from behind, and then in front of the optic. Okay, so now it just remains for us to do some stromal hydration. First a little side-to-side injection that kind of just lines up the roof and floor of our tunnel. A little bit over here. Now the stromal hydration of the sides. The positioning of that IOL I'll leave to the end. Okay, so now we're ready to take some OVD out of the angle. There'll always be a little bit. Yeah, just a little pressure. Almost done. Now, if I didn't like that IOL position, I'd rotate it. Just a tad to see if it maybe doesn't ride as far nasal. Yeah, the bag is a very flexible structure. But it's not uncommon to have an IOL want to ride a little bit nasal, and the rhexis is a little nasal, and they kind of go together, and that's all good. It may also be just a little superior. Let's see if we can just bring it down a little bit. But, you know, it's going to go where anatomy takes it. You've got a big bag because of a myopic eye, whatever. Okay. And it's now centering better. Okie doke. A little trick, when you have a little fragment floating around, see that little fragment? Now that means nothing, 0. But if it floats over toward an incision, it means something. What does that mean? It means it's leaking. So you can actually see leakage if you have a little tiny particle or so. Yeah, but to go in after that would be silly. There's no reason. Okay, so we're done.